CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. Thank you so much for being here each and every week, especially as we start our new kind of format for the summer, which is audio-only podcast. We're going to spend a little bit more time than during the video show talking about what's happening in BC politics, breaking it down. There's the leadership race is ongoing. We've got the Council of the Federation meeting that has wrapped up. There's interest rate hikes, all sorts of things to talk about. We have a slightly different configured panel this week as well, with people on holidays and other things. Of course, Jillian Oliver, BC Green strategist extraordinaire, is here each and every week. Jillian, thank you for being here.
Great to be here, Rob.
And special guest joining us after many, many years of having to put up with me as his co-worker in the legislature, Vaughn from the Vancouver Sun is here. Vaughn, thank you for being here. I don't know what I did to deserve you coming on, but probably you've got some sort of gossip on me from over the years, so that's how it works.
Well, thanks for asking me, Rob, and I'll be quite honest about it. I miss working with you, so it's a pleasure.
So that's good. Your check is in the mail on that, so that's... Vaughn, we're going to start with you. We're going to start with the Council of the Federation. And, big meeting for people who are listening to this. It was all the provincial and territorial leaders, 13 of them gathered in Victoria, talking about issues and priorities, coming up with what's basically an annual list of demands from the feds. And this year, all healthcare. The Premier, John Horgan, our Premier, is chairing this meeting. He feels that Ottawa only pays 22% the cost of healthcare. He wants that to go up to 35%, a $28 billion lift from the feds, and it would boost, I think, BC's healthcare budget by $4 billion to solve what's well-documented healthcare issues, hospital ER closures and wait times and nursing shortages and doctor shortages and on and on. So that was what Horgan went into the meeting with. How did it go from there, Vaughn? You were watching this and you were around. Take us through it.
Well, Rob, I'm not sure I can improve on your comment that the federal Liberals clotheslined our Premier in the middle of the meeting, but that's sort of what they did. They dispatched two cabinet ministers to go on national television, and basically the first one went on and said the Premier John Horgan's numbers on the healthcare funding split are fake, and then the second minister went on and dismissed John Horgan's call for a First Minister's conference on healthcare. He said, we're not ready for that yet, and that's not where we're headed. Now, I know John Horgan is really only speaking for the premiers in his capacity as chair of the Council of Premiers, but this is also something he's been pushing himself. So I thought the federal Liberals really knocked the ground out from under him in a rather brutal way, because they did it on national television in the middle of a conference where John Horgan was hoping to be the star.
Vaughn, why do you think they did that? Like, what is our explanation for what appeared to be a working relationship that just dissolved before our eyes?
Well, I think the working relationship was based on Justin Trudeau wanting to attract a significant number of votes from people who vote NDP provincially and get them to vote for the Liberals federally, and to set up the partnership he now has with the federal NDP. And right now, I don't think Justin Trudeau sees any political gain in making John Horgan particularly happy about anything, so he didn't do it. Ottawa doesn't really want to give a whole lot more money to the provinces, no strings attached, which is what the premiers were asking for. So there was no way they were going to do it. I'm not sure they had to do it in such a brutal public fashion, but, there maybe aren't any friendships in politics. There may just be political self-interest that can be a pretty brutal business. Just ask any member of the Greens who signed that partnership with John Horgan back in 2017, how lasting that friendship was.
Yeah, Jillian, what was a bigger heel turn, Trudeau on Horgan or Horgan on Sonia Furstenau in the snap election? That's what I was thinking. And what did you make of how this all played out?
Yeah, well, obviously, very different dynamics there. But maybe Jagmeet Singh will be in for the biggest one of all. We'll see how it all pans out. Yeah, I think a couple of things from Ottawa's perspective. I think they feel that they handed out a lot of cash during the pandemic to the provinces, which they did. And now, the kind of biggest issue on their radar is inflation, and they're, facing calls from conservative leadership contenders to rein in spending. And, they were quite explicit about not wanting to just hand a bunch of money to provinces, to premiers, especially, we've got a lot of conservative premiers throughout the country who are just going to turn around and issue checks like the premier of Quebec did and is probably going to do again because he's got an election coming up. So, I think that in some ways it makes sense that Ottawa is asking the premiers to come up with a plan for how they're going to spend this money, because healthcare transfers from the feds go into general revenue and they don't always go to healthcare. So I think that's fair. I also think there's a huge issue of political credit, like we saw with the childcare deals that we got before the federal election. Those were, especially in BC's case, that's a provincial promise that's getting funded by the feds that, the BC NDP is going to go ahead and take full credit for. And, I think it's a little bit fair, like the NDP comms, they're effective because they're really good at, having a very simple message. In this case, we're not getting enough money for Ottawa. They find the smallest possible number they can tell the public, and it isn't wholly accurate because of the way that the tax credit system works. So I can kind of understand in some ways where the federal government is coming from. Not like, it was kind of funny to see Horgan accuse the prime minister and his ministers of bargaining through the media, when I think that that's exactly what he had been doing for the weeks leading up to the conference. I also think, though, where the clothesline happened, I think it sounded like Horgan was genuinely surprised that he thought that maybe this money was coming. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago when he announced his resignation. So I wonder, I think it probably is still going to be in the works, but it's going to be maybe stipulated that it has to go to specific types of initiatives that are in line with the federal government's priorities, or it's going to be rolled out in a way that's more in line with Ottawa's choosing, that doesn't look like, it's a strong NDP premier kind of pushing around the prime minister, especially, given that that's sort of the way that the federal NDP is trying to portray themselves in that governing relationship. So I think it will come, but it will come in a way that Justin Trudeau chooses.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It seems inevitable that Ottawa has to put in more money, and the premiers kept trying to say this, like, it can be an accounting issue, it could be a whatever issue, but the system is in crisis and people are angry, and it's a top issue for voters. So I agree, Jillian, like, there's no way that Ottawa can't put in more cash. It's only really a matter of whether they get the strings they want, they get the data that they want, they get the proof and the credit for certain areas, mental health, doctor recruitment, surgical backlogs, or whether the provinces want to, die on the hill of complete and absolute total control of the healthcare administration, which they have, even though, they want more money from Ottawa. That seems like where the deal is going to have to happen, is over those terms, right?
Yeah, I mean, we just kind of have to hope that it's done in a way, because I don't think that Ottawa is, they don't administer healthcare. They're not in a position. I don't think it could easily backfire if they, get too in the weeds. They're going to hopefully, the folks crafting those deals and policies are being mindful that, it can't be overly prescriptive. So also because the provinces all have different needs, different demographics, health challenges, these sorts of things. Yeah.
Vaughn, what do you make of I guess both the strength of Ottawa's position, which Jillian outlined, that they are spending a lot of money. They gave a lot of pandemic money. Provinces are able to use that to have some surpluses they didn't expect on their budgets. They're trying to offer rebates. They not necessarily even promising to spend all this money on healthcare or how they would spend it. It seems like a pretty good argument, but on the other hand, you've got Premier Horgan cashing in his, all his chips, his personal relationship, his legacy, his influence. It seems like there's quite two good arguments on both sides, perhaps.
Yeah, but it's the federal government that gives and the province that takes, and the provinces don't have a lot of leverage. So I think there's a matter of political timing here. Quebec has an election in the fall, and the biggest obstacle to strings-attached federal funding is the Premier of Quebec. Quebec doesn't like strings attached and won't stand for it, certainly not before an election. So I think Jillian and you are both right. I think the day will come when we will have some kind of a federal provincial agreement on increased funding for healthcare, but I think it will be a strings attached agreement. I think Ottawa will insist, if it's putting more dollars into the system, that it gets to say this is what it's going to, because otherwise, again, I agree with what Jillian said, there's really no credit goes to Ottawa for what it does. Even when they write a pretty big check, they don't get a hell of a lot of credit. There was an announcement yesterday of federal and provincial funding for the extending SkyTrain to from Surrey to Langley. And the federal government's putting up $1.3 billion for that extension. But if you go through the transcript of the press conference yesterday, like half of the provincial NDP caucus and cabinet was there taking credit for it and grandstanding and parading around the stage. And you can just see the feds going, I'm putting up $1.3 billion for a photo op for Rob Fleming and George Heyman. Like, why are we doing this?
Yeah. Well, they're doing it because that was where the bromance kind of really developed, right? The federal Liberals stealing the BC NDP's playbook for their election hopes in Metro Vancouver in 2021 and funding that line and taking $10 a day childcare and kind of becoming a version of the NDP in BC to try and win votes. So they have to see it through now. But you're right. It's not like anyone's thanking Ottawa at this point. They dump money in and the provinces take credit.
We get the media releases all the time, and we know that for stuff where the province is paying full freight, they announce it 10 or 12 times, right? They announce it again and again, every little tweak, every nuance. So, if you're going to have the federal government put up that kind of money for a big project, you'd think they would be careful to give them a lot more credit than they do.
Yeah. Well, we'll see if this deal on healthcare, whatever form it takes, with whatever strings, happens before Premier Horgan has left office. We don't know when. We don't know when that is. Whether that's the last olive branch to the premier, so he does get his legacy. Who knows? There's a lot.
He's done. He's done. He's not. They're not going to do it for him. The next premier of British Columbia, at federal convenience, the next Premier of British Columbia may get invited to a First Minister's Conference on this, maybe in 2023.
Yeah. We'll come back to the issue of the leaders race in a minute, but another topic I wanted to bring up and have you both chime in about is the Bank of Canada increasing interest rates by a full percentage point this week in their bid to fight inflation, a much larger increase than people expected. And in BC, our premier was on with Richard Zussman on Global saying he's still considering, and they're getting ready to announce that affordability inflation rebate of whatever form, maybe using the Climate Action Tax Credit Fund, something the Liberals have been calling on the premier to use for months now for affordability because it can be income based and it's already sort of in play. How much pressure is the BC government in, Jillian, to respond to inflation, to respond to affordability, even the echo effect of gas prices from months ago? And is that pressure kind of manifesting in some sort of cash check, do we look like, that may or may not make the most amount of sense, but just like it's just so acute that the NDP is getting pressured to throw some money out the window here? Or how do you kind of view the tension that's at play?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the finance minister essentially said they're kind of working on it and that something is kind of imminent. They've got a growing list of things like this that they've promised that they haven't delivered on. There's also the renters rebate that I think she said that she's still working on, and free contraception, other things that have not yet been delivered on. So I think they feel pressure from that side of things for sure. I think, the problem is like with these kinds of rebates is like, it's really hard to make them big enough and to give them to enough people to really have the impact felt. Like when they announced the ICBC rebates, like most of the response was kind of like, well, this is like a paltry, it's nothing. And it's very expensive for the government to hand out these kinds of sweeping rebate. So I don't know. I mean, and things are changing really fast too, right? Like we're seeing housing sales slow down and prices come down. So I think they're sort of like, especially with housing prices coming down and not knowing like where that's going to bottom out, and given the impact of that on the budget, I think they're maybe also kind of trying to walk this line of reassuring people that they're on it, that they're working on it with some urgency, but also making sure that they kind of have some sense of where things are going to land in the next fiscal year.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Jillian, you're saying, Jillian, the renter's rebate, and thank you for bringing it up, because we're working on the renter's rebate. That line is about to have its 5th birthday, because it was in the NDP platform, and they didn't do it in their first budget update in September of 2017, and every time they've been asked since, we're working on it. Like, how complicated is it? If you think it's a stupid idea, why don't you just say it's a dumb idea and we're not going to do that? But to pretend that this thing is so complicated that it takes 5 years to bring it in is just empty and hollow. So that's my take on that. I agree with you on the rest. I think it's, they do have to do something, but I'm not 100% sure I can remember the date, Rob, but it seems to me that John Horgan told us back in April that he had told Selina Robinson to get working on relief for British Columbians from inflation and the rising cost of living. And both the cost of living and inflation have only been going straight up ever since.
I think, it's quite possible the reason that the renter's rebate is taking so long, to go back to that topic, is because it's a stupid policy. And it really is dumb. And it's been dumb since the moment they announced it. $400 a year, like $33 a month, or as Christy Clark put it in the 2017 election, $1 a day for renters is a useless amount. And yet it costs an enormous, like billions and billions of dollars to pull that thing off the ground. So they're just slow playing the renter's rebate because it's a dumb promise that they don't actually want to do, and they don't actually want to spend any money on, I think, too. But Vaughn, the way that inflation affects the budget, like you and Jillian have touched on this in different ways. There's the housing revenue, there's all sorts of different things, but there's the capital side where interest goes up and squeezes projects out. There's revenue side, there's expense side. Like, how do you think the finance minister's worried about that as well?
Well, I think I think they should be. She is, and I think she should be, because you're right. I mean, inflation affects the budget in ways with, rising. It affects people and it affects rising cost of living, but wrestling inflation to the ground, in the memorable expression of the 1980s, affects the budget and affects people as well, because the main way you do it is by jacking up interest rates. And you raise interest rates. I mean, you had the summary this week. It drives up the government's cost of borrowing. The government's borrowing a lot. It will affect the housing market, which means it affects the biggest cash cow in the budget, the property transfer tax. People will, because of the rising cost of their mortgages combined with the rising cost of living, will be spending less on discretionary stuff. So that has an effect on the provincial tax revenues in other ways too. So we keep fighting inflation in this country, and we could talk ourselves into a recession, and that'll have a big impact on the economy and on provincial finances as well.
Yeah, imagine the next NDP leader inheriting a budget where they have to start clawing things back because of inflation, or making the decision that has always been in front of them, where they just keep running deficits to avoid having to deal with those kind of issues of nickel and diming a budget down when there's no money there. So that brings us to the leadership issue, which we're going to talk about every single week until whenever this actually happens. But there is continued speculation about whether this is just a coronation for David Eby, who picked up Ravi Kahlon on the jobs minister's endorsement. We talked about that on previous shows, or other people might jump in. And this week we did hear Finance Minister Selina Robinson say she's seriously considering a run, especially because she's been approached. And anytime a woman in particular is encouraged to run for that job, she said she needs to take it very seriously, and she's going to take it very seriously, whether she wants to do that. I was surprised by this. I did not expect Selina Robinson to actually seriously consider this. To be totally honest with you, didn't really expect her to even run again in the next election. And I kind of was like taken aback by that. I thought, well, I mean, if she does run, that would be a significant challenge for David Eby. Jillian, what do you think? Is this just mulling it about? I mean, we do know behind the scenes that Robinson and Eby are not the best of friends in terms of colleagues. We do know there is a movement of people who don't want David Eby to just win this in a coronation. Are they aligning up behind Robinson? Or there's the dynamics of leadership races and that type of thing. What do you think's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's sort of different reasons why people enter leadership races. One is, they're just like for power and that, which there certainly is like lots of that around in politics, of course. But I think also, like genuine competing visions for the future of the party. And I think, that's why I was so taken aback when Ravi Kahlon made his announcement. It was understandable that he didn't want to run for leader for personal reasons, but to immediately throw support behind Eby, I think was what was most surprising, because we had kind of been hearing that there was more division just in terms of, what is the future of the party? Do they continue sort of along like a very moderate model like Horgan had, or do we want to? Is it a time where we want to see more kind of transformational change? And it, I think that this shows that there's probably more people than we thought, or that Kahlon's announcement indicated, that are concerned that changing course too much is not a good idea, both for the the political fortunes of the NDP and also just in terms of governing the province, which I think is healthy. Like, leadership races should be about having a conversation about both what's good for the party and what's good for the province, especially in this case where they're going to be electing a premier. So I hope that we do get to have some conversation about it. And I think that's kind of what's behind it. Now that Kahlon's out, those folks are looking for who else can kind of carry that banner and lead that conversation that they think is necessary.
Yeah, I agree. I think the flip side, though, is that when Ravi Kahlon did decide to endorse Eby, it was a very deliberate choice to promote unity in the race and to say that the caucus and the cabinet can line up behind one person. We can continue governing the way John Horgan was. We can signal to the public that we're not going to fight about this. We're not going to undermine our decisions and have big races where we question the decisions we were all united on in cabinet. And I wonder, Vaughn, do you think we'll still see that? Do you think that in some ways it was kind of, obviously Ravi didn't want to run for family reasons, but he did make a move for party unity to help the party by endorsing Eby. And having a cabinet minister like Selina Robinson jump in would divide the caucus and cabinet again. And what are the pros and cons of that, do you think?
Well, you're right. Jillian's right. What Kahlon did was a little bit unusual, because he was thought to be the second place person in the race, and Eby hadn't even announced he was running yet, and yet basically Kahlon came out and said he's the guy. And I noticed Bowen Ma did the same thing this week. So I don't think anybody thought Bowen Ma would win the leadership, but there were a number of people who thought she's bright, young, ambitious, and might well run just to raise the profile and raise some of the issues, because she has been out on social media questioning, for example, the government's enthusiasm for LNG, and she's remained a member of cabinet, but she in fact questioned that. So she was the kind of person you'd expect to jump into a race if there was going to be a field and there was going to be a range of candidates. Instead, she said being premier is not for me, and she endorsed David Eby as well. So I think, we keep hearing coronation, but New Democrats know pretty well what the situation is inside, and I think they think Eby's got it in the bag. Well, that raises a question about running against him. So, yes, Selina Robinson said this week that she thinks that she's been asked to run, it should be taken seriously, and she's thinking it over. She's not the kind of person that's going to run to raise their profile. She's Minister of Finance. Like, how much more profile does she need other than being premier? And if the race is already in the bag for David Eby, you wonder about running. If you're going to run against a guy, you're going to have to take him on. You're going to have to challenge him on some stuff. There'll have to be a debate. And do you really want to do that if you're going to lose for sure? So I'm beginning to wonder if anybody's going to jump into this race. They're waiting to find out. This weekend, we hear that the party is going to announce the date for the convention, which may be as late as December, and they're going to announce the entry fee. Now, there's been a rumor they're going to have a big entry fee, like $25,000 to run. If they do that, why would you spend $25,000 to lose? So I think if the party really wants a serious race, they're going to have a smaller entry fee, and maybe that will lead a few people to throw their name in. But really, seriously, if it's going to be a coronation, why would you want to tick David Eby off by running against him?
Yeah, unless you're not running again. Unless, if you're Selina Robinson and this is it, and you feel a responsibility to challenge David Eby, and if you win, you're premier, and if you're not, you're done. It's possible, I guess, that might be it. But I generally agree with you, and I think the party rules are coming out this weekend. It sounds like we're looking at a December-ish leadership vote. That seems to be the latest kind of rumors that we're expecting from that. That's because the party wants to give time for new members to be signed up. There's a 90-day cutoff before the vote. And yet who's going to be signing up members, I guess, if there's no race? And why kind of tie one hand behind the new coronated leader, David Eby's back, by doing it in December when there's a budget in February that he won't be able to influence? Those are kind of the pros and cons, I guess, the party is weighing. Is there going to be a race? And if so, should we give people time? And if not, do we really need to do it in December? Do we really need membership signups? I think. And what will the fees be? I think you're right, Vaughn. And Jillian, does anything else jump out at you about all of that debate?
Well, I was just getting about what you said earlier about, why challenge Eby. If you're just going to take them off, it might be that perhaps a potential challenger already feels like they're going to be out of cabinet anyway if he wins. So I think there's more incentives there. But I agree. I think there's not going to be much incentive to sign up members if there aren't challengers. On the other hand, a longer runway does give people the ability to raise a bigger entry fee. For example, even if it was a challenger from the other side, there's been some of the most vocal critics of the current government's record have been from sort of the environmental wing. And if you have more time, you can raise more money from other sources, which has been a model, increasingly been a model for like more populist candidates like Bernie Sanders in the States. So that could happen if it's longer, and maybe that's what they're hoping for. I don't know. And then of course, the party, these rules are decided by like a elected board of officials, basically within a party. I think it's called, I'm not sure what it is. It called provincial council for the NDP or executive.
Yeah. They have to go through the table officers, and then they got to go through provincial executive, and then they got to go through provincial council.
Yeah. So they're weighing sort of like both, political outcomes and also party outcomes, and sort of trying to balance those against each other. And, they've got, I'm sure, lots of different contacts within the party in their ears that all have their kind of own arguments and motivations, including, maybe making sure that there's one more budget that is in the model of that's so far has served the government. So all of those things are kind of being weighed, I'm sure, at the time right now.
The one advantage for a finance minister to run, even though you have to resign from cabinet, is at least you know what's in the budget that you're locking down for the money that you can spend on your things. If David Eby wins, he's got a budget he had no participation in that he's got to shepherd through the House in February. Vaughn, I know you thought you were going to get off easy on the show, but I'm putting you on the hot spot for the last question. No matter how this plays out, are we in for a spring, summer snap election next year? Or what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think it'll be Premier David Eby, and I think he will call an early election because of all of the other stuff we've been talking about, which is it is not going to get any easier to govern British Columbia. Into the economic storm we're headed in, the unresolved problems with family doctors and healthcare and all the other stuff out there. So I think whenever he gets chosen leader, he's going to say, I need a mandate. And the way you get that is you go to an election. So, yes, I do expect we'll be into an early election next year. Never mind that the New Democrats wrote into law that the next election should be in October 2024. We already know they don't respect the dates written into law for elections. Just ask the Greens.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think that's probably where we're headed, and that will be a very fascinating election fight for sure, because I don't think we are in the kind of political arena anymore where you get a second chance. So one chance Kevin Falcon versus one chance, David Eby, Selina Robinson, winner take all. It'll be quite, and then whoever loses, boy, there's going to be a reckoning in those parties. They'll be reshaped and remolded depending on the outcome of that as well. So Vaughn, thank you for joining us this week. It was really great to have you on and to talk to you again.
Fun.
Yeah. And Jillian, thank you.
Great pleasure working with you again.
Yeah, Jillian, thank you as well. And thank you everyone for listening. Make sure you're subscribing to Political Capital on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher and Google and I don't know, where all the other pod things that you do the pod stuff on. We're recording on Fridays, so we'll be back next week, talk about all the latest in BC politics. Until then, thanks so much for listening.